My name is Bonnie Sheikh, and I am the Executive Assistant to SVLG CEO Ahmad Thomas. I'm very pleased to be here to introduce our first panel entitled Modern Work HERdles, H-E-R-D-L-E-S. Over the next 45 minutes, you will hear from a group of women who are tackling the issues and obstacles we continue to face in the modern workplace. Our first panelist, Erica Padilla-Chavez, is CEO of Second Harvest Food Bank in Santa Cruz County. She has spent her career fighting inequity in California and beyond, and leads an organization responsible for feeding over 75,000 people in Santa Cruz County every month. Joining Erica is Assemblymember Buffy Wicks, who represents California's 15th Assembly District. She has spent her tenure breaking down the barriers that women in political office face and is one of the most visible legislators in California. Our third panelist is Clotilde Hewlett, also known as Chloe, Commissioner of the California Department of Financial Protection and Innovation. As the head of California's financial regulator, she and her department enforce the state's business laws and protections for consumers. Rounding out our panel is Patty Hatter, Chief Customer Officer at Palo Alto Networks. In her role, she helps one of the leading and innovative Silicon Valley companies with their goal of challenging and actively changing the lack of diversity across the tech industry. And moderating our discussion is Rhonda Johnson, President of AT&T California and a member of SVLG's Board of Directors. Welcome to all our panelists, and enjoy. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm thrilled to be here, especially sitting up here with such distinguished ladies who do amazing things, have had amazing careers, and are here to share some of their perspectives with all of us. So we'll have some time at the end for questions, but we're going to kick into the gear right away. I'm going to ask each one of these ladies a question to start off, and then we'll follow up with an individual question for each of them. Okay, jumping in. In this discussion today, we're going to learn a lot about women in the workplace and your journeys over time. In the last month, U.S. women saw a major gain in the labor force participation. In your own opinion, what do you think should be employers' main focus to avoid a risk of retention if structures aren't put in place to ensure that women stay? And I'll start with Patty.
Great. I think it's great to see things ticking up. I think there is some positive out of the pandemic because it forced people to start to think about things a little bit differently. And I know we have here at Palo Alto Networks, but flexibility of work, not having to be in the office 5 days a week, and really thinking about what are the benefits, what's important to folks. And I think that will be even more important going forward as organizations, individuals have gotten used to it. So I think the flexibility and the balance between companies' needs and individuals' needs will be really important. And we started a sort of a foundational platform around our FlexWorks to really embed that in how we do business across Palo Alto in each geography. And that's really taken hold of sort of building in the flexibility and the benefits. So hopefully that'll be something that we see other companies comfortable in doing also.
We all have to adapt, right? Changing times. Chloe.
I would second all of that, mainly because I'm a strong believer, if you really want to support women, then don't put them in the position where they have to make a choice between their families and their career. This is why you'll hear me say telework, 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 because I think it's very important, particularly for women at certain points in their career when they choose to have children, a family, or when they have to take care of elderly parents or sisters and brothers for a medical condition, that they have employers that are going to be understanding and give them the full support during that period, even if they have to take off or even if they have to have a reduced schedule. But most important of all, I think what we've learned through the pandemic is allowing them to work at home, and at some particular jobs, if they cannot work entirely at home, at least giving them the opportunity to have some days off during the week. I think if more employers give that kind of support, we would find more women breaking that glass ceiling.
Definitely. Okay, for today, Assemblywoman Wicks, can we call you Buffy?
Of course, you can always call me Buffy. Yeah.
All right, Buffy, what about you?
Well, I'm going to echo some of these similar answers here. You know, and during the pandemic, I remember the December 2020 job numbers where it was 100% of the job loss was women and women of color. Women were hit hardest, and women of color were disproportionately impacted with this pandemic. So it's good to see the numbers coming back. I think there was some time where we thought, is this going to set the women's movement back decades? You know, and we'll see. Hopefully it doesn't. But those numbers coming back are good. You know, I actually ran a bill that would require employers to provide reasonable accommodation where it made sense for this type of flexibility. Now, it may be shocking that the business community did not support the bill, and it didn't make it through. I'm willing to go back and try it, but I'm hopeful that companies will do this anyway, because they know to keep employee retention, you have to provide these things. It's better for your employees. They're happier if they have some amount of flexibility. And we're just talking about, again, reasonable accommodation. Someone's sick, you know, and we've confronted this before. You know, wildfire smoke is heavy. The daycare is closed today because it's an outdoor facility. And what do I do with my 2-year-old? You know, there's any number of different things that kind of come up. And when you're a parent, and I know because I have a 2-year-old and a 5-year-old, and I deal with it in my current job as a legislator, you know, you have to have that reasonable accommodation. We also know that discrimination against caregivers is real. You know, 71%, I believe the number is, of parents have experienced, and mostly women have experienced, some form of discrimination, meaning they don't get, you know, the promotion. They're looked over for hiring purposes. When you say you have little kids in an interview, like, employees are like, oh, red light, this person's going to be a nightmare to deal with, right? We have to overcome that so that these places are accepting, particularly for women, because women tend to be the primary caregiver, not always, but tend to be in their household, and increasingly the primary breadwinner. So it's important that we provide these types of flexibility, or we're going to regulate it, you guys. No. I hope that the employers will, on their own accord, do it, because, again, they know that it helps with employee retention.
Makes sense.
So the benefit of being last is that I can say ditto, ditto, ditto. But, you know, I'm going to be very practical in how I answer this. I represent a sector that is overwhelmingly represented by women, the nonprofit sector. Yet, when compared to male counterparts, female CEOs make, on average, 10% less than male counterparts. Obnoxious, right? And so to your question, Rhonda, we have to be intentional about looking at pay equity. And we need to be intentional about looking at our compensation structures. And this applies not just to the nonprofit sector. It applies to all companies, right? Because why? Because we're talking about economic power. A woman who has an opportunity to save up for retirement, a woman who is able to be compensated accordingly, comparatively to their male counterparts, can lean into a job. They can give it their all. And then, of course, all of these flexibilities that have been described by my colleagues up here just adds to that leaning in. So, but we have a very structural issue with gender pay gap, particularly hitting women hard, right? So I think we've seen movement in that regard with private companies. Many nonprofits are moving in that direction, and we just need to keep at it and not lose sight of that.
Makes sense. And as we sit here, I mean, the name of this panel is, you know, modern work hurdles, right? And we're all talking about mobilizing and making sure that we use our power, and in the workplace, make sure we make our voices heard. And that makes a lot of sense. Okay, now, Patty, I have a question for you, and you have amazing stats here at Palo Alto Networks, and you're really walking the walk here. Your executive team has increased to 27% females, and your new hires from the 2020 graduating class comprised of 52% women.
Right.
What is Palo Alto Networks doing to bring more female applicants, and what are they doing to help support them and make them want to stay and be successful here?
Right. And the numbers are very strong, and we're very proud of those. And it starts in the whole process, even when you're recruiting people. How do we make sure that we get a full slate of diverse candidates into these interviews in a time frame that is meaningful, that they're not just a check in the box, yeah, we need somebody, that's a little different, but really meaningfully looking for these candidates. And we've really focused on that, and we've seen that shift our numbers. But then you have to retain them. And we've seen in a lot of the tech companies in Silicon Valley, we lose a lot of director level, across the valley, lose a lot of director level females that are like, I'm stuck and I don't know what to do. I just don't feel like I have the support. So at Palo Alto, the very first employee, we call them employee resource groups, but they're communities of interest across the company. Our very first was in for females, and it's not just only females. It's the whole group of interested people, male, female, anything of how do we help the mentorship, the sponsorship of this community. And for Palo Alto Networks, we're over 10,000 employees. We have over 1,500 employees that are in our women's ERG, Employee Network Group. So it's a very strong contingent. And then the beauty of that is, because I've sponsored some other employee resource groups, is that women's group ends up being the leader to help foster the others. And then you have that much more camaraderie, sponsorship, knowledge of each other. So that's super helpful. And I think one of the things that we've been able, that community of spirit, how do we move forward? How do you take, I'm a technical female, how do you get past some of your let's double check the homework, am I really qualified for these different jobs? You have a community that's really lifting you. So I think that's helped us not just hire at a much bigger proportion than other companies, but actually retain those females.
It makes a lot of sense. The employee resource groups can be really a wonderful and value add for employees when they start. And if you have the women's group, then they have a collaborative they can work with.
Right. Some place to go and ask questions that you wouldn't necessarily want to talk to your boss about or the rest of your group about. It's a real community.
That's great. That's great. Okay, I'll go to Buffy next. Okay, in 2020, you went viral for bringing your 1-month-old little one to the floor. I remember this.
Right, yes. Good job, Mama.
You helped to show the world that, yes, women really can do it all. And here we are now 2 years later. As you mentioned, you have a 2-year-old. Have you seen any real changes in the laws that assist new parents in the workplace? And, what do we still need to do? What has to be done?
Yeah, so that was, I did not anticipate going viral. I just was like 4 weeks post C-section and ironically came up because I needed to vote on a bill to expand paid leave. And it was 140 votes. And I was vote number 41, which put it over the top. And I, in fact, had tried to remote vote and was denied for a number of reasons. But anyways, I said, okay, I'm coming. I'm bringing my baby because she's eating every 2 hours. I can't leave her at home. And then there you go. There you have it. But so it's ironic that I was voting on that bill. So that has helped, right? Expanding paid leave. But we still need to do a number of things. I mean, I think the pay gap thing is huge. And again, it disproportionately impacts women of color. Black and brown women are impacted more on this issue, on the pay gap issue, than white women. So that needs to fundamentally be addressed. The other thing is the cost of childcare is so expensive. And so you have women leaving the workforce because the cost of childcare is so expensive. And when that happens, when they come back 5 6, 7 years later, their male counterparts are here in the chain of command, and then they're coming right back here again. And so this is part of the problem as well. And, like in my district, it's cheaper to send my daughter to University of California, Berkeley than it is to afford preschool. And that's just normal average preschool, right? This isn't like fancy. This is just like childcare, right? So that's just insanity and needs to be fixed. And we as a society need to say that that's something that we value. So I think that's important. And then the other thing is the pay rate needs to be increased for leave, especially if you're a low-wage worker. If you're going to take a cut of 40%, and that means you're not going to be able to afford rent, you're not going to take leave. And a lot of our low-wage workers take a week or 2 off, and then they go back to work, or they come completely out of the workforce. So these are structural things that I think need to shift. My hope coming out of the pandemic is that we would really wrap our heads around this. I think there's been some changes. There needs to be a continuation of more. I got a bill on the governor's desk right now, which expands the definition of family, because also a lot of people aren't living in a, man, wife, child setting anymore. It's a dynamic world. So choosing who your family is so that when you need to take leave, you can do that, and expanding that definition to sort of modernize it, I think is also important. So we're working on a number of those things, but we still have a ways to go.
Well, I can speak for myself, and as women, I think overall, having you represent these issues and the work that you do in Sacramento really does make a difference. And it's nice to see so many women leaders in Sacramento.
Oh, thank you.
So, great. All right, let's see who's next on my list. Chloe, I'll go to you. You've spent the better part of your career being the only woman, the first woman, or one of few women in the workplace. As a prosecutor, there were very few women in the courtroom. As the executive director of the Cal Alumni Association, you were the second woman to serve in that position, not to mention the first woman of color. And now in your current role, you oversee the financial support of the state of California. What were some of the major hurdles that you came across in the male-dominated fields, and how did you overcome those?
Well, I'm going to answer it in 2 parts. How I dealt with it in the early part of my career, and how I deal with things now as a 68-year-old grandmother.
So, you got some wisdom.
So in the early part of my career, and to give you some framework, early 70s, late 60s, particularly when I was one of the first women peace officers in law enforcement, it was during a time when San Francisco was under consent decree. Women were not allowed to drive police cars. That's why we were under consent decree, and we were relegated to the desk. And so here I'm coming in the middle of this particular time. It wasn't covert discrimination, it was overt discrimination. And at that time, a lot because I had come up from extreme poverty, I didn't care what I faced. I was not going to be denied. So my strategy at that point in time was to be the very best that I could be. I was not going to be denied. And I was going to be strong and recognized and fearsome. So if you didn't respect me, you will fear me. And so I created my own board of directors, my own political network, so that when I was in the room and you didn't recognize me, my network would take care of you.
Oh my God.
But as I got knocked down so many times, I can't even give you the number. But each time, no matter what, through sheer will and perseverance, I got back up again. And I became a very strong, aggressive, outspoken person in which, yes, there were a lot of men that began to fear me and they respected me. But it was during the trip I took to Japan, and I met this very high-level leader in Japan, and she taught me the real power of soft power. Soft power. And I always had thought that soft power was a weakness, and I had trained myself on the hard power route. But when she taught me soft power, and I started using soft power, that's when I started making significant changes. And soft power is about moving the heart of your adversary, actually moving the heart of those that may not take you seriously or disrespect you. And as I've gotten more and more confident when I walk into a room now, I really look at how can I connect with that person's heart to make that systemic change that I want to see. And I think that's the most important change. And I have a lot more compassion when I walk into the room. And you can imagine when you're over financial services for the state of California and you have the power to affect the global economy and you walk into a room, I would say probably about 99% of the time you're the only woman. And, but I still, even with that, move it through more of a soft power as opposed to what I did early on in my career.
Oh, very interesting.
You're a badass.
Yeah, really. Yeah, I agree. Very good. And lessons we can all learn from, too.
Yeah.
Okay, Erica.
Yes.
Congratulations on recently joining Second Harvest Food Bank. In your previous role, you took the organization from a staff of 20 serving about 2,500 children to 2 locations into a staff of over 65, serving over 7,000 students and families in 3 locations. What part do you see yourself playing in this new role now to ensure that there are less obstacles for a new generation of women entering your organization or, as you've talked about, nonprofits?
Yes, yes. Well, thank you. I just have to say, Chloe, thank you for sharing your story. Very, very impactful for me. You know, one of the things that I will say is that I talked about that pay, right? And so how is it that in my current role, I'm going to ensure that women, as they enter Second Harvest Food Bank, feel welcomed, feel accepted, and feel a place of belonging. And it starts with pay. Because I'm a big believer that compensation is the biggest manifestation, physical manifestation of any person's value, right? As an employee's value. And so I'm very intentional about making sure that we are addressing that because it's frankly the first conversation you have with any new employee, right? What's the benefit package? What's the salary? So there's got to be some attention to that. And I want to say that at Second Harvest Food Bank, I walked into a situation where the board of directors that is women-led was working on a compensation study and did just that for Second Harvest. So I was very fortunate that I came in and I signed off all those personnel action forms saying, guess what, folks? You all get a bigger paycheck, right? But, you know, no kidding aside, I think there is some focus on that. And so when it comes to women, it's important that we recognize that when we don't do this exercise maybe every 2 or 3 years, what are we doing to women if we already know that women in the nonprofit sector are falling behind? And that's true about all sectors, right? So that's I'm very practical when I think about what I can do with women. But then on a personal note, in supporting women, I have to think about me and my role as the CEO, as a woman of color leading an organization. And one of the things that I've discovered in my own journey in leadership is how important it is to find your voice, to know who you really are. Because I think, borrowing from Chloe's the before and after, early on in my career, I think I had an idea of what being a leader was all about. And I thought it was about being vocal, and it was about being seen, and it was frankly mimicking what I was seeing by my male counterparts in leadership positions, right? That didn't fare too good for me, right? I think one, because I was a woman, but I'm also a woman of color, right? And so I actually created more adversaries than I did supporters, right? And so I had to ask myself, what am I doing wrong? And 23 years ago, I took to journal writing because I wanted to figure out how to discover my voice. And it's through journal writing that I discovered who I am as a person. I'm a big believer in setting time to just be quiet and listen to yourself, and that's how I do it. And so, you know, as a leader now, I think it's important for me, now that I feel like I definitely have found my voice, that I practice really just being vulnerable, right, with my employees, right? I want to share my story. I want them to see me for who I am, the leader I am, so that they can, especially the women in our workplace, see themselves as one day being the CEO at Second Harvest Food Bank, or frankly, any company. And so I practice vulnerability, right? I practice vulnerable leadership. People can come in to ask me questions. That's one of my rules, right? Leave the door open and let people know that when my door is open, they can come in to say, hi, how are you? Just because I have a big title doesn't mean that, oh, you can't come into the CEO's office. So those are the changes that I'm making now. And I actually believe, all of you ladies have spoken to this, we can play a very big role in inspiring women in our own workplaces to one day take our spots. And I think that's my mission, my personal mission.
That's perfect. And that goes right into our sort of final round. I'm going to go through each one of you and ask you this. And it is something from your own personal journey and from each of you where you maybe started to where you are today. If you could share just a piece of advice with the women in the room today that, you know, has stuck with you, either that you received or that you learned in your journey, or that you are wanting to share with each of them, because, you know, we're about helping each other, putting our hand back and lifting each other up. So I'll start with you, Patty.
Well, I'll take the technical women here. So I think, and I've spoken with a lot of different, at different women's groups and women in different stages of their career. And I think it's, in general, it's fair to say it's still a bit of an average, but in general, technical women, we're the ones that like to double check our homework. You know, we're the ones, if we miss something on a test, it just, you know, ate us up, and then we go study even harder. So, you know, I had a very fortunate experience early in my career. I had a boss who, you know, God knows why, but believed in me, shoved me off to like build a business. I'm like a newbie, barely out of grad school, go to Europe. I'd been in Europe once for Oktoberfest. It's like, figure it out. Go move somewhere, build a business, then you can come back. And just the, you know, the confidence, somebody has confidence in you and you have to go do it. The listening, you know, okay, all of a sudden I land in London with a bunch of bankers. What do British bankers do? You know, okay, we're filming. They drink a lot. So that's not my gig, but I had to learn, you know, how do you fit in? How do you find a way to work through this and not be the one in the office till 10 p.m. double checking something that only you care about? So, you know, I think for, you know, it's to women overall, but especially to our technical females, you have to open up, you have to look up and engage with others, and not just other females, but really find the connection points across your whole community, because finding a way to connect those dots, which I think is a unique skill set that females have, but you have to look up. You have to be willing to put yourself out there, have an opinion, even if you know everybody doesn't agree, that's fine. Nobody died. Your family still loves you if people don't agree with you. You have a reason why you think that. Go say it. Go convince people. Doesn't happen on a Tuesday, go back at it on Wednesday. Go back at it the following week. So the natural persistence you have to find, the natural voice you have to find, and focus on things that you care about, and your passion will come out. And that's a differentiator for everybody, but I think especially females.
Makes sense. Makes sense. Okay, Chloe.
I wish I knew in my 30s, 40s, and 50s what I now know at 68. I feel liberated, finally. And I would say, first and foremost, you can do it all. You can't do it all at the same time. And life is long. It is long, so you have the opportunity to do everything you want to do, but you might not be able to do it all at the same time. And when I was so much younger, I did believe I could be Superwoman. I could be the super wife, the super mother, the super volunteer, the super high-level felony litigator, the super politician, because I had been mentored to be that Superwoman. As a woman of color, I wore the Superwoman cloak. And then when my health started falling apart, and the clumps of hair started coming out of my head, I said, you know what? I can't do it all. And it's okay. It's okay. Because I might not be able to be what I'm doing today, back when my children were babies, because it was a little bit too difficult for me to manage. But I will have time to fulfill my dreams and my objectives. You have time. And if you have to take time out, as I had to take time out when my mother had breast cancer, and I treasure every second, every minute I was with her during that time, and during the time that she was dying. That's okay too. That is your choice. Don't let anyone put that Superwoman cloak on you. Be true to who you are and realize you can do it all, but you just can't do it all at the same time. True. And if you got to outsource some things, that's fine too.
That's perfect. That's perfect.
Very true. You know, I think, and I do think it's different when you're younger versus as you get older. You know, and I'm 45, so I'm now like comfortably middle-aged. Is that right? And when I was younger, it was just, I wanted to just be the most invaluable person on the field every single day, just absorbing everything. And I actually think that's important, right? You're learning. And I've worked in politics for a long time, and I remember one of my mentors said, you got to go be where the action is, right? I went to Iowa to go work for Howard Dean because the Iowa caucus is the place to be in a presidential campaign, because Iowa is Iowa, and it determines who the president's going to be, right? So I pick up and I'm moving to Iowa. Okay, here we go, right? Or whatever the next thing is. And I think what I've seen in politics often is people try to jump to the next thing very quickly. And I think it's actually important to be in a place where you're learning what that space is. I get asked all the time, are you running for Congress? You know, what's the next thing? You run for statewide office? And I'm like, I don't know what the heck I'm doing next, but what I do know is I need to do this job really well in order to figure out whatever comes next. And I think that's important to sit in that place for a while and really understand that job or that role or that position or whatever it is, because you're just gaining knowledge and experience and confidence so that when you do elevate up, you're doing so in a way where you're much more ready for that position. So I think that's actually an important lesson. I think we get taught all these things about next thing, next thing, next thing, next thing, you know, and it's okay to say, you know what, I'm good here for a little bit, right? I want to learn these things. I am very happy in the California State Legislature. I don't need to go to Congress. There's a bunch of other people there that can deal with Congress, you know? And I think that's just an important lesson that often gets overlooked in our sort of like hyper-competitive world that we live in.
Yeah, so true.
Yes, very similar to all my colleagues up here. And I would add that, and it goes to my earlier comments about knowing who you are. I think oftentimes we end up living for others and not for ourselves. I know that was my case, trying to outdo my eldest sister, because I'm just competitive like that, right? And it was all about that. And then really getting to the point to understand what is my calling, what is my purpose. And I do believe that everyone has a purpose and a calling in life. And that the challenge of life is about figuring it out. And some of us get the opportunity to figure that out sooner rather than later. But there needs to be some attention to that, right? Because if you're not minding it, then you're not going to find it. Right, so that's an advice that I give to all of my employees right now, and I'm happy to share that overwhelming percentage of our employees at Second Harvest range between the ages of 20 and 29. So I have Gen Z and millennials at Second Harvest, and I love it, right? Because they're yearning, they're wanting to know, what is it like? And then the other thing that I will say about leadership is that, and I've learned to practice this, it didn't come naturally, it's through failures that I actually learned it. And I embrace mistakes. I embrace, falling flat on my face every once in a while, because those are the real opportunities where you really learn, right? And oftentimes, I think I was raised to believe that anyone who makes a mistake is equal to a failure, right? Probably because I was a soccer girl, and if my team didn't win, we would hear about it, right, from the coach and our parents. But it's the reverse, really, in life. It's through those hardships and those challenges that you learn the most. And so I would recommend that you embrace, those moments where you didn't necessarily, perform at 100%, and really reflect. Spend time reflecting, because there's a story and a message. And I think I carry that with me, hence the journal writing, right? Because that's where I get to really percolate and reflect on what is happening to me in my life, whether it be my career or as a mom or as a wife, right? So, yeah.
That's perfect, perfect. Okay, so I think we have some questions. Okay. All right, and I know we're watching our time. Okay, Palo Alto, this is for Margaret. Palo Alto Network's women leaders have to work more than our male counterparts and to retain their positions. Is that true? Is that true?
Well, let me say, so I've been in a lot of companies, always in the tech space. The cybersecurity space is an interesting one. There is always something bad happening in the world. And you can feel the pressure globally ratchet up. I'll use my own personal example. It takes a lot, because I've seen a lot. I know we always get through it. I was actually worried earlier this year. That says something. So I would say in different sectors, in different industries, it is more of a consuming passion of how do we keep, in this particular one, how do we keep our customers safe? I mean, there is a real sort of medical with the hospitals, how do we have the emergency rooms not taken over by ransomware? There is we have to keep this machine going. So I would say overall in the cybersecurity industry, there is a 24/7-ish view of it. I wouldn't say I don't feel it any more females, and I have a great mix of folks, and fortunate to have a very large organization here. I would say it's more of a industry thing where there's just such a sense of we have to protect the world. We're trying our best to keep people safe, literally safe, their money safe, their company is safe, and that ends up being more of a mission, that you have to draw your energy from that mission than it is not a 9-to-5.
Yeah, that makes sense, right?
There are a couple of people from my organization in here. It's like, echo that.
Okay, perfect. So to all of you, how about the darker side of telework? It's a 24/7 experience. You kind of alluded to that. What about you other ladies?
I couldn't do it. I found myself working 24/7, and it was actually impacting my mental health, right? I found myself after the first week, which of course, migrating to a whole virtual environment when you're not designed to do that was half the battle, but then really just working yourself 24/7 out of the need, and not having that geographic separation between a home and an office, for me, was just not a good combination. Now, that's not true for everyone, right? So to the point, I think that was made earlier about having flexibility of how we do work in our companies is very, very important, because it's not a one-size-fits-all.
Makes sense.
I mean, I prefer I like to be in the office some days a week and then at home some days a week. But I do think, and I want to acknowledge I'm saying this from an incredible place of privilege, putting boundaries in for yourself is actually really important. And I have the ability to do that because I sort of run my own schedule. But, you know, I do dinner, bath, and bedtime every night. I drive back and forth from Sacramento. I don't spend the night there like all my other colleagues because I have 2 little girls and they're frankly more important to me, you know, and I make that a hard, fast rule. You know, I work out. I make that a hard, fast rule. There's only one you know? So even with the work from home, I still manage to do those things and create those boundaries, which are really important. But I also recognize that everyone has the ability to do that depending on where they're at in their job.
That makes sense.
The reason why I said you can do it all, but not all at the same time, there will be some jobs in which one cannot do telework. There will be some jobs in which there is not anything resembling balance. I have one of those jobs. Cybersecurity keeps me up at night. Cryptocurrency keeps me up at night. What's happening financially in this country keeps me up at night. I am on one plane after another. I have to meet with a multitude of groups and may only get, at times, 5 hours of sleep. There is no way I could have done this position when my children were small. And I would have to also admit, because you have to be, to your own self, be true. I'm an extrovert, so I love being out there, meeting with people and seeing people. I almost lost my mind during the pandemic. You know, well, we had to be sheltered in for a while. This is who I am, but at the same time, I would say it's not for everybody, and it really depends on the individual and where you are in your respective life.
It totally does. Well, we have hit the time marker. I love some of the nuggets that came out of today. There's only one you. Be true to yourself. Make sure that you're looking not only at yourself, but those around you and supporting each other. It is about empowering each other and about having that mobilizing our power together. And this group of phenomenal women have done a nice job today to sort of share their experiences and answer some of our questions. I want to thank you very much for your time, and we should all give them a round of applause.